Hey, U.S. history. So today we are going to get started with World War I, which is a topic I know many of you have been looking forward to. So we start in 1914 with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, which, by the way, was a seriously botched affair that they almost completely screwed up. And if it wasn't for one of the would-be assassins taking a wrong turn, getting lost, and then ending up right in front of his car, it wouldn't have happened at all. And so the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife, Sophie, really was the starting point of World War I. But as you'll see later, there was a lot leading up to it that led to it, much more than just that. But you do create this Central Powers versus the Allies, okay? So, your Central Powers specifically are Germany and Austria. And your allies are going to be France, Britain, and Russia. Which is a pretty similar breakdown to the beginning of World War II, but not 100% the same. But let's talk about America during this point in time and talk about idealism. So Woodrow Wilson did not want to spend his entire administration dealing with foreign affairs. He wanted to deal with domestic things. He wanted to make America a better place to be. Unfortunately for him, he would spend almost the entirety of his 2 terms dealing with, in some way, World War I. His Secretary of State, William Jennings Bryan, the guy who keeps running for president and not winning, he had little knowledge of international affair and no dealings in diplomacy. But there was a lot of Wilson's background and character that would leave an enduring mark on the policy. Wilson wanted to share political ideals. That was his manifest destiny. He wanted to expand the United States economically, promote trade with other nations, that sort of a thing. But his idealism is first put to the test in Mexico. Okay, so let's talk about what's happening in Mexico at this point in time. From 1876 to 1911, Porfirio Diaz, again, I'm so sorry, I know I'm butchering the Spanish accent stuff, he ruled Mexico with an iron fist toward his opposition and an open palm towards foreign investors. So he was a dictator. I'll write his name down. So that's 1876 to 1911. And the dictator's name was Porfirio Diaz. Okay, Diaz, an European and American businessman, all profited from petroleum mining resources in Mexico. But in 1911, there was a popular revolt led by Francisco Madero, and that drove Diaz into early retirement. But the rebellion also unleashed violent rivals for power. Just weeks before Wilson's inauguration, President Madero was murdered by his own military commander, General Victoriano Huerta. Many countries quickly extended diplomatic recognition to the new government in hopes of reestablishing that business relationship because Mexico has oil and mines. However, most countries, including the United States, traditionally extended recognition to a government simply if it held power without concerning itself on how it obtained the power. Huerta's regime was described as one of the most grotesque tyrannies in Mexican history. But this time, Woodrow Wilson refused to recognize government by murder. He said, "You murdered your predecessor. I'm not working with you," which is a good thing as far as idealist goes. And he said, "My passion is for the 85% of people in Mexico who are now struggling. I'm going to teach South American republics to elect good men." Determined to drive in, the president began supplying arms to Huerta's challengers, Pancho Villa, so they actually cut off arms shipments to Huerta. So now not only is Wilson not recognizing Huerta's government as official, but he's actively working against it, okay? So this is all happening right around 1912 or so. So 1912, Huerta murders Madero, who was the guy who had replaced Diaz, and Wilson refuses to acknowledge Huerta and his government and actually supplies Pancho Villa, who was one of the leading revolutionaries, against Huerta. He also cut off arms shipments to Huerta, and in April 1914, a group of American sailors who were enforcing this were arrested. And although they were immediately released, the admiral of the American fleet decreed that Mexicans hoist the U.S. flag, render 21-gun salute. Huerta, of course, refuses because this would be embarrassing to him to be seen supporting the Americans, citing national honor. And on April 20th, 1914, Congress grants the request to not go to war, but to officially start fighting Mexico. Okay, so 1914, you're officially fighting. It's a bloody clash. The ABC powers, Argentina, Brazil, and Chile, ABC, they mediated a truce between the United States and Mexico. And Wilson actually eventually led to topple Huerta and bring Carranza into power. But peace did not come. Pancho Villa, who was originally being supplied by Wilson, still wanted command, and despite the fact that Carranza is now in power, Villa is still fighting, and now becomes he wants to become the chief enemy of American gringos. He became a legend in Mexico, with people either flocking to his banners. He was nicknamed La Cucaracha, praising his exploits. But Villa was ruthless. He had 18 American mining engineers murdered. He led a raid into New Mexico, killing 17 Americans. And in response, President Wilson sends General John J. Pershing into Mexico with 11,000 troops to try and stop Villa. But they searched and searched and searched, could not find him. And as problems in Europe are getting bigger, Wilson finally says, okay, you know what, we have to stop, and orders Pershing to call off the hunt for Pancho Villa. So we're interfering in Mexico. We almost get ourselves into war there. It's a mess. Now let's talk about the Caribbean. So at the beginning of his administration, President Wilson denounced both Taft's dollar diplomacy and Roosevelt's big stick policy. But they need to protect the Panama Canal. And so virtual anarchy is reigning in Haiti at this point, 1914 and 1915. Bloody power struggles leave the island strewn with bodies, threaten to catch foreigners in the middle. Fearing the loss of American lives and European intervention, because they don't want Europe involving. No matter what, Wilson does not want Europe getting involved. So Wilson orders U.S. Marines to occupy Haiti. American forces were there for 20 years, trying to bolster a new civilian government, building roads and schools, and establishing order. So some good, but you could also argue that we very much stuck our nose in where it did not belong. But again, they did stop some of the bloody fighting in Haiti, so there's that. The other place we interfered was in the Dominican Republic, because civil war is going on, and so the U.S. Marines occupied there for about 10 years. And as in Haiti, the Dominican Republic did benefit during the U.S. occupation, but there's a lot of resentment. Haiti, the DR, the other countries in the Caribbean, they don't like America just showing up when they aren't invited. And so now you're starting to get this resentment happening. And while all that's happening, you have the complicated web of war in Europe. Some of you may remember from last year the If World War I was a bar fight, and I've included it again on your Junopod so you can read through it because it's quite fun. But it describes how the war going on in Europe is such a mess. Oh, goodness gracious. So after the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, fears and friendships among the nations of Europe really start to have things blow up and cause war. The Austrian government assumed the Serbian government was responsible, and so they demanded that Serbia submit to its rule until Serbia was purged of anti-Austrians. Surprisingly, Serbia said that we'll accept most of your demands, but not all. But Austria wasn't happy and declares war on Serbia. Okay, so July 28th. Yes, July 28th, 1914. You've got Austria declares war on Serbia. And that's how it starts. Russia, fearing that Austria intended to establish control of the Balkans, mobilized its troops. Germany, Austria's ally, declares war on Russia. Okay, so Russia technically hadn't declared war. Russia just mobilized troops. Germany declares war on Russia. Since the Russians had a mutual security pact with the French, Germany demanded to know what France was doing. The French were scared of the Germans, and so the French decided to build up their army just in case the Germans attacked them, and the Germans consequently declared war on France. So France. So basically, Germany looks at France and says, whose side are you going to be on? And France says, we're not sure, but we're going to prepare an army just in case. And Germany goes, cool, we declare war on you. And then war on France. Note that after this point, none of this has to do with Austria and Serbia, who were the two involved in the assassination in the first place. All right, let's keep going. With France and Russia flanking Germany, the Germans turned to their long-standing plan for waging a two-front war called the Schlieffen Plan. And according to its directives, the German army had to crush France by swinging through Belgium and then occupying Paris. Belgium was neutral, but Germany said, hey, can we invade France by going through your nation? Basically, can we march a giant army through your land? And Belgium said no. And Britain looked over at Belgium because they had a treaty, and they said, don't touch Belgium, don't plan the invasion, or we'll go to war with you. The German ruler, Kaiser, kind of like King Wilhelm II, basically said, Britain, what are you going to do if we try? And we're going to ignore you. Late that night, after an exhausting but vain negotiation, the British foreign minister noticed the London street lamps and said, well, the lights are going out. We shall not see it lit again in our lifetime. And war began. So Germany invades Belgium to get to France. And in doing so, Britain declares war on Germany. This all happens, by the way, within a week of Austria declaring war on Serbia. And then, of course, Belgium is drawn into the war, and they're not happy about it because they didn't want to. And by the end of August, the Germans had pushed all the way to the gates of Paris. The French and British tried to push them back, but were unsuccessful. So Germany had completely occupied Belgium, completely occupied Paris. And it is a mess. This all takes place within a month at this point. And when news of this reaches the United States, President Wilson has to figure out what he's going to do. So you've got the melting pot problems because, quite frankly, you've got Irish immigrants who are favoring Germany. You've got British immigrants who are favoring Great Britain and favoring France because France helped America in the War for Independence. And then some Americans viewed Germany as an invading monster. And so you've got Americans that are starting to fight, and there's trade triggers. So because of the British blockade on Germany and British naval control of the Atlantic, American trade with Central Powers is no longer happening. America can't trade with Germany anymore because Britain's blockading them. When the Allies used up their credit, Wilson allowed American loans to the Allies to avoid a collapse of American trade because Wilson realized that, well, we can't trade with Germany because we quite literally can't get there. Britain's blockading them. And if we trade with the Allies, it's going to look like we're favoring them, but we can't trade with nobody or else we're going to lose half of our economy. So they traded with the Allies. So yes, the United States was neutral, but they were only trading with the Allies, which made them look a lot pro-Allies. The Germans basically were saying, well, if you want to trade with Allies, that's not helping us. And so they unleash their submarines, their U-boats. Probably the most significant factor in America's entrance was the violation of American rights on the sea by German submarines because the Germans are seeing the Americans trading with the British, and just like the British want to stop German trade, the Germans want to stop British trade. Make sense? Are you confused yet? It's a lot. Germany feared U.S. intervention and had publicly warned American citizens. They said, don't travel into the war zone. Don't trade with British ships or you're going to get hurt. And the British passenger line Lusitania left New York to go back to Britain, and Americans were aboard. Despite the Germans saying, don't do it. Don't get on British ships. We're going to attack British ships, and if you're on it, you're going to get hurt. The commander of the German submarine spotted the ship, fired the torpedo, sank the liner, killing almost 1,200 people, including over 100 Americans. President Wilson was very moved by the tragedy, but he said, listen, there is such thing as a man being too proud to fight. We know we are right. We don't need to fight to convince the other nations that we're right. We're not going to fight. And although political opponents started attacking Wilson, he said, no, we are not going to war. Germany replied to Wilson's demand for an apology. They did say, we're sorry that we killed Americans, but let's be real. The passenger ship was carrying war supplies back to Britain, and we had to sink the war supplies because we're at war with them. So sorry we killed your guys, but we told you not to go there in the first place. Again, a mess. The war issue, though, is simmering. In 1916, a German submarine attacks a French liner called the Sussex. And among those killed and injured were, again, several Americans. The fury over the attack on the Sussex called Wilson to turn to Germany and say, listen, stop attacking passenger ships that have Americans on it. If you do it again, we might go to war. And that was called the Sussex Pledge. But the thing is, Wilson now has said, if you attack us again, we're going to go to war, hoping that it would stop Germany. But at this point, if the Germans do attack again, Wilson has no choice but to go to war. Now, in the middle of all this, you have an election. So I haven't really been writing a lot of this down. 1915, you have the Lusitania incident, the submarine warfare, and then 1916, you have the Sussex. Okay, so U.S. 1915, the Lusitania, which is the Germans thinking of that British liner with Americans on it. And then 1916, you have the Sussex, which is that French ship that had Americans on it. Now, election of 1916. Wilson's slogan is, he kept us out of war. They said, look, war's been waging in Europe for 2 years. We haven't been part of it. Elect me, we'll stay out of it. Now, a lot of people interpreted this as a promise. Elect me, we'll stay out of it. But technically it was, he kept us out of war, not he will keep us out of war. Loophole! It meant that when Wilson inevitably went to war in 1917, spoiler alert, he technically wasn't breaking his campaign pledge because he just said he kept us out of war, not he will keep us out of war. And so Wilson won. The election of 1916, was elected to a second term. So, that's that. It's a mess. You know that meme of the guy who looks a little crazy and is connecting all those red lines like conspiracy theories? That's like World War I. Okay? So, as long as you're not too confused, that's the end of today's lesson. Tomorrow we are going to talk about what American intervention in the war looked like. It is a little bit longer, but hopefully it should be really interesting. And then, not tomorrow, sorry, Monday we'll talk about that, and Tuesday we'll finish that up, which means that likely end of next week is when we're going to have a test. All right? So with that said, good luck on today's JunoPod. It should be active soon, and yeah, go from there. Good luck. I hope you guys are having an awesome day. Tomorrow's your day to catch up on everything, so if you're missing anything, let me know. I can reopen it for you, and we'll make that work. All right? Have an awesome day. Have an awesome weekend, you guys. Bye.